National Field Organizing Coordinator for Move to Amend. I work at an organization called Democracy Unlimited, and we were one of the founders. And so our role is field organizing support. So that's what I do, and I'm really excited about the topic that we're going to cover today and how many people are here. So let's go ahead and dive in. Just so to orient you a little bit, on the left of your screen you can see who else is here. If you want, you can maximize your screen. I think you can do so by, if you kind of mouse over the screen, I think there will be a little square that'll pop up that'll let you maximize it. And when we get to, unfortunately, I'm not sure what happened. I accidentally minimized something, and now I can't see your questions while I have my full screen going here. So what we'll do is we'll take questions at the end when I get out of the PowerPoint and go back to the webinar service. And so I'm sorry that you'll have to hold your questions. You can type them as we go, actually, and then I'll be able to scroll back through them when I can come back and see them. And if you're having extreme technical difficulties, the email there is to contact the service directly that we use. But things have been working pretty well today. So I'm going to quickly cover starting a Move to Amend group, because I know there are many of you here who are interested in doing that or in the process of doing that. So I'm just going to make sure you know be co-opted and for us to end up. And when we get to, unfortunately, National Field Organizing Coordinator for Move to. So my name is Kaitlin Saposi Belknap. I live in Eureka, California, in the northern part of the state, and I am the National Field Organizing Coordinator for Move to Amend. I work at an organization called Democracy Unlimited, and we were one of the founders. And so our role is field organizing support. So that's what I do, and I'm really excited about the topic that we're going to cover today and how many people are here. So let's go ahead and dive in. Just so to orient you a little bit, on the left of your screen you can see who else is here. If you want, you can maximize your screen. I think you can do so by, if you kind of mouse over the screen, I think there will be a little square that'll pop up that'll let you maximize it. And when we get to, unfortunately, I'm not sure what happened. I accidentally minimized something, and now I can't see your questions while I have my full screen going here. So what we'll do is we'll take questions at the end when I get out of the PowerPoint and go back to the webinar service. And so I'm sorry that you'll have to hold your questions. You can type them as we go, actually, and then I'll be able to scroll back through them when I can come back and see them. And if you're having extreme technical difficulties, the email there is to contact the service directly that we use. But things have been working pretty well today. So I'm going to quickly cover starting a Move to Amend group, because I know there are many of you here who are interested in doing that or in the process of doing that. So I'm just going to make sure you know where those resources are. I'm also going to do a little bit of review for some of you, and for the first time others of you, just briefly talk about our goals and strategies at Move to Amend. And then I'm going to talk about initiative resolutions, or resolutions through the initiative process, and how to get started, and then have time for Q&A, and then there's a few next steps at the end. So these webinars normally are about an hour and 15 minutes. This one we might be able to keep to an hour. We'll see how it goes. But we won't go more than an hour and a half for sure. So our long-term goals at Move to Amend are democracy in the United States. And right now, our democracy obviously is not working more than ever before, but we think it's important to stress that in many ways, we've never really had, the promise of American democracy has never really been fulfilled, and that's what our real agenda is. Move to Amend is a coalition with a number of different organizations that are all committed to this, and we've come together on the Move to Amend campaign, which is about making clear that corporations do not have constitutional rights. And by corporations, we're actually talking about all artificial entities. So nonprofit corporations, unions, constitutional rights should be for human beings, and then any protections for non-human entities should happen through the legislative process, because that's what's most democratic. We also think that we need to overturn the Supreme Court invented doctrine that money is speech, and clearly establish that money is property, and you cannot have democracy if those with the most money have the most access to speech and free speech. And then we're also interested in constitutional renewal in general. Some of the things that were part of Move to Amend's kind of foundation included a call for a constitutional right to vote, and also local democracy and affirmative human rights. Right now, the Constitution is largely about protecting property rights, but there are many other human rights that, in fact, some other countries have in their constitutions that we don't have here. And we would like to have a national dialogue about all of those things and what would be the most democratic and human rights affirming document that we could have as the foundation of our legal structure in this country. So in some ways, the sky is the limit, but we're starting with this focused campaign on getting corporations out of the Constitution and establishing that money is not speech. And then from there, we want to embark on going even deeper. So I'm going to focus now on just this effort to do this amendment to the Constitution. So from our perspective, not just after Citizens United, even before that, because of the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Constitution and invention of corporate constitutional rights, we can't just look to new laws to solve this issue. And we also can't rely on a new Supreme Court decision. So we're really going to need to amend the Constitution, and that's the only remedy available, and that's the remedy that will actually solve the problem. So to remind everyone, the process to amend the Constitution as laid out in it is that two options. We can either propose a constitutional amendment via Congress, and so a resolution or an amendment would be introduced, and it has to pass through both houses of Congress and then go to the states, and 3/4 of the states need to ratify an amendment for it to pass. The other method is a constitutional convention, which is very minimally laid out in the Constitution, but it is in there. It's never happened before, other than the initial one. But it does say in the Constitution that if 2/3 of the states call for a constitutional convention, they can then at that convention amend the Constitution. And so either option is a very big job. We've only had 27 amendments to the Constitution, and remember that 10 of them came all at once, right, with the passage of the Constitution. So we make no mistake about how big this job is, and despite all of the momentum and excitement and energy that is thrilling to be part of right now in this country, it's still a very big job, and we don't see this amendment happening tomorrow or even necessarily, in the near term. We're prepared to be here for the long haul, and we're also prepared to go as quickly as the American public will with this issue. So our organizing strategy kind of matches that philosophy that this is a long haul fight, and also remember that real democracy is what's kind of our underlying agenda. So we are building an organizing strategy that matches that agenda. So our strategy is not to go to Congress right now. We do have an amendment written, and we are exploring having that introduced in Congress at some point in the next year. But we intentionally did not start there, and we don't intend to go into that arena until that would be productive. And the reason why we don't think that would be productive is because, we all know that the people who are in Congress are largely there because of the corporate dollars that helped elect them, and we don't see this campaign coming from Congress. This needs to come from the American public and the grassroots. And in fact, the amendments that have been introduced, while exciting, and they show that we definitely have made a lot of traction as a whole in this movement in the last 6 months to a year, those resolutions are largely symbolic, and we don't see them as getting much traction going forward in 2012. And so, despite the momentum that we've had lately, we still feel as though what we need to do is build from the base up with local resolutions that push up to state initiatives that push into Congress. And I will just say, too, that one of the things that we are concerned about now that there has been more acknowledgement of this effort is actually the potential for it to be co-opted and for us to end up moving more quickly and not bringing enough people along, and ending up having the powers that be realize that they need to do something, and having us come out of this effort with an amendment that doesn't actually solve the issue of corporate constitutional rights or conclusively establish that money is not speech. And so those are kind of things we're not willing to compromise on, and therefore we need to build a movement that's powerful enough and also not willing to compromise on those issues. So, here we go. So the way to get there is we need to educate millions of people, we need to organize millions of people, and we need to be able to mobilize millions of people. And while corporate personhood has been catapulted in front of many, 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 many more people than it was before, in large part thanks to our brothers and sisters and peers in the Occupy movement. Many of you who are on this call, in fact, it still hasn't gone to rank and file or regular everyday Americans. So that's who we need to be reaching out to. We also need to grow our organization and our local organizations and build coalitions, and we also need to be able to put pressure on elected officials. And ultimately, we're going to need to take this fight into the electoral realm and ensure that those who represent us make this a litmus test issue for elections, and then be able to back that up and actually be able to make sure that the people who are in office, whether we're talking about Congress or the state level or even the local level, are with us on this campaign. So from our perspective, resolutions across the country are the first step, and there are many reasons why they're a very strategic step, and I'll talk about some of those. So, sorry, dog barking, I'm gonna ignore that. So here's Move to Amend's model resolution for the municipal level. Basically, it just says that we, this community, stand with the Move to Amend campaign and other communities across the country to defend democracy from the corrupting effects of undue corporate power, to amend the Constitution, and to establish that only human beings, not corporations, are endowed with constitutional rights, and money is not speech. And therefore, and to make it more clear to people what that means, regulating political contributions and spending is not equivalent to limiting political speech. And then be it further resolved that the people of this place hereby instruct, and we're using that language intentionally. I do want to give a shout out to our friends at Common Cause who are also using this voter instruction language and have been digging up some very fascinating history on how this method has actually been used, voter instruction, in the past in the United States to direct elected officials on how to act. So it's not a request, it's not a beg, it's not a grovel, it's an instruction to our state and federal representatives to enact resolutions and legislation to advance this effort. So I think this sort of speaks for itself, but just to make it explicit and clear, a resolution is a non-binding, in many ways, symbolic statement for or against something that a body or a community takes. But the be it further resolved that we have here is an important piece, because that's something that we want to be able to come back to after these resolutions pass, to take to our elected officials at higher levels to point to, one, that their constituents clearly feel this way, and so they should too, but even more explicit that, they have already been told what they should do. So it's not just, a request, it's actually a direction, and it doesn't have binding legal authority, but it's a powerful organizing opportunity and potentially a political campaign opportunity to use in subsequent elections, and also in other places in a state. So because people always want to know where to go next, and there is a lot of enthusiasm, which also sometimes makes us feel like impatient about this because it's a big problem and we know that it needs to happen yesterday. I did want to also give a glimpse into our thinking about, I said municipal resolutions going up to state resolutions. And so our thinking about what those state resolutions would look like is they would kind of up the ante a little bit, escalate the situation. So this is not the language, but this is a concept that basically the state resolutions, when passed, would say something to the effect of, we call on Congress to pass this amendment, and it would reference our amendment, and we give them 1 year to do so. And if after the date that this resolution passes in the state, if Congress has not passed this amendment within that year, then we, the people of the state, instruct our state legislature to call for a constitutional convention to pass the Move to Amend amendment and to explicitly say what that amendment will do. So this is a little bit more than a just a declaration, because it's explicitly saying that by a certain date we're basically starting the process of moving towards calling for a constitutional convention. Now, I know that there are very legitimate reasons why people might be concerned about a constitutional convention. The biggest thing that I hear and that I agree with is a concern of a runaway convention that could address all kinds of other issues, and kind of once you start that, open that can of worms, what are you getting into? So there is a whole debate and discussion happening in multiple levels amongst many different sectors of the population, including on the right and on the left, and about a constitutional convention and is it worth the risk? And so Move to Amend is engaged in those conversations. We're not the only ones having them. So we have not decided officially that this is the track that must be taken. It's our perspective that we want to basically give Congress an opportunity to do this through the mechanism that has been done for the other amendments that have passed. And then, but we're not going to put all of our eggs in that basket, and we're certainly not going to naively assume that Congress is going to follow through on this. And so we need to have a plan B. And plan B would be these state resolutions that begin the process of calling for a constitutional convention. And even if some of these start to pass, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what ultimately will be what gets this amendment done, because in the past, when states have started to make rumblings and move towards convention, for example, the amendment that overturned prohibition, there started to be some states that started to call for a convention, and Congress very quickly was able to turn on a dime and, lo and behold, pass the amendment in a record amount of time. And it was because they didn't want the states pushing them around. So this, again, can be a political tool to use, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we will end up with a convention. But at the same time, there is potentially a lot of opportunity for a constitutional convention. As much as there may be risk, there also may be great opportunity to end up with democratic reform that this country has never been able to see. And there are many other countries that have had constitutional renewal and convention type processes that have resulted in a lot more powerful and human rights protecting documents. So we're open to all of that, basically. But none of it changes what we need to be working on right now. So in some ways, we don't need to answer those questions yet. So there are multiple ways or levels to do resolutions. I'm going to talk mostly about voters voting on resolutions and governing bodies passing resolutions, but I just also want to mention that you can definitely, and many folks are already working on and have gotten organizations, other nonprofits, political parties, unions, business groups, even student body governments at the college level, to pass resolutions in support of this campaign and calling for this amendment. So we're really going to need this campaign to be in all areas of people's lives if it's going to catch on the way that we need it to and become like a household conversation. And so I really encourage you to think about all the ways that you're involved in your community and how to bring this issue to those places. But like I said, we're going to focus mostly today on governing bodies like city councils, county boards, etc., and direct voter resolutions. So the first step in this whole question of passing a local resolution is, does my town have the citizens initiative process? The citizens initiative is actually a democratic reform that was fought for largely by the populists at the turn of the last century, and so there are many states that have the initiative process, and also there are many communities that have the citizens initiative process, but not everywhere does, and it really, really, really varies, and unfortunately there's no one place that you can go to just quickly find out the answer. So let's start with at the state level. Here's a map of states that have the initiative and popular referendum. You'll see they're the red ones. So you'll see that most of the states in the West, and some in the Midwest and a few in the East, are the states that have the initiative process. And again, that's in part because the people who fought for that reform were the populists, and their strongholds were in the Western states. So but it's worth mentioning that two things. One, even if your state has the initiative process, that doesn't necessarily mean that your local community, your municipality, allows for the initiative process, unfortunately. And likewise, fortunately, even if you're in one of the blue states that does not allow initiative and referendum, it may be that at the local level, there is the initiative and referendum process. So almost 90% of American cities have some kind of referendum procedure, and so don't despair if you live in one of the blue states. It basically means that there's still some research for you to do to find out whether the citizens initiative is really off the table for you. So our suggestions for how to do that research are to start by, first of all, think about past ballots that you voted on, and did they have initiatives on them? That's a good key, or a clue at least, to know whether there is a local initiative process of some kind in your community. You could also talk to other folks who are politically engaged, like political party leadership, fellow citizens, other community groups, to find out if they know if you have, and what you're asking about is a municipal or a local initiative, citizens initiative process. These two websites right here, Ballotpedia and the INR, which stands for Initiative and Referendum Institute, these two places have done some research. Again, there's no one place that you can go and just type in your zip code and find out if you have the citizens initiative or an initiative process. But by hunting around on those two sites, you can find out some information, and it varies from state to state how conclusive it is. But those are two good places to look. You could also try to contact your Secretary of State. And the reason why your local elections department is last, even though in many ways that should be the place that would know the answer right off the bat, because if you do have a citizens initiative process, they're the ones that you'll be working with, and they'll be the ones who are telling you what the laws are. We have found on this campaign, but also in past work that we have done on other local resolutions for other issues, that oftentimes your local elections department are actually the least informed about the correct ways to interpret the laws and procedures. So if you go into your local elections department to ask, I don't want to say don't do that, but keep in mind that they may very well be telling you wrong information, and also they're probably, if anything, going to err on the side of discouraging you and telling you that it's not possible. So it's a good idea to check other sources as well, and also potentially to enlist an attorney either in your group or to recruit one into your group to just help you out in interpreting the codes that your local elections department, you can ask them, what are the codes that govern initiatives here, and they should be able to tell you where to look. And then if their interpretation is that it's not possible, but you can see that there's actually some question about that, an attorney can help you. We could also try to help you at National Move to Amend, but keep in mind that we are, mostly volunteers working at the national level, and so we'll do the best that we can, but since we don't live in every state, some of it will be new information for us too, and it can sometimes be hard to find these answers. But between all of this, we want to make sure that if you're committed and interested in doing an initiative process, that you have what you need. So those are some places to look, and then if you run into any stumbling blocks, let us know, and we'll see what we can do to help direct you to other folks on the ground who might be able to help, or to do that help ourselves. So another thing to keep in mind, if you find out, for example, that you either are living in a community that does not have the initiative process at the municipal or local level, or you're in a state that just doesn't allow it at all, and when I say initiatives process, what I was talking about there is the citizens initiative process, where citizens collect signatures from their fellow voters to put something on the ballot, basically bypassing the legislature or the city council, which is a legislative body, and going directly to the voters, who then, for the purposes of the citizens initiative, become the legislature directly. So that's a citizens initiative process, but there's sort of the kind of in-between option, which is what exists in many places that don't have the citizens initiative process, which is that a local legislative body, a governing body like a city council or a county select board or county commissioners or village council can put something on the ballot themselves. So right here, what we have is kind of assuming that you have both options at your disposal. You can do a citizens initiative process, or you could go to a governing body and ask them to put something on the ballot for you. And there are a number of places that have done that, and there's some pros and cons to either of those options. So as I'm saying all of this, just keep in mind that it may be that the governing body option is your only option, and so you'll just have to work within these advantages and disadvantages. But if you have the citizens initiative process, then we're talking about the via signatures. So a governing body, the advantages are, and this is oftentimes where people go, oh, we can get this done faster. We don't have to collect all those signatures. We can just go to our city council, and in fact, and some of you may be familiar with some of our wins that we've had over the last couple of years, where city councils have gone ahead and passed those resolutions directly themselves. And well, that's those, I count those as wins because they are. The downside of that is that overwhelmingly less people know that happens when you pass it through a city council. I mean, probably most of the folks on this call have been to a city council meeting or watched one on TV at some point or another, and you know that most of the time there's not very many people there. And even when you do your damnedest to pack the chambers, at most you're going to have a few hundred people who are engaged with this, and then that's it. And then of course you can work on getting media before and after and reach more people, but there's nothing like putting this in front of voters directly. There's nothing like people going into the ballot box when they're going to be voting for president, like we all will, presumably, in November 2012, and seeing this issue right in front of them, or seeing campaign materials leading into the election. So that's why we're really, 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 really encouraging folks to work on at least some level of initiative for 2012, if at all possible. And our goal is to have 50 towns and cities put an initiative on the ballot one way or another for November 2012. We had 3 in 2011, and our goal is 50 for 2012. Obviously, that's a huge jump, but we think that's commensurate with the outrage and the energy that exists out there right now, and I'd love to blow 50 out of the water. So please do, I hope you're here to think about doing this in your community and being part of that 50. And if we do that, we will have millions of people who will have heard about this issue who I guarantee you know nothing about it right now. And that will be huge for moving us forward into 2013 and being well positioned to actually run some of these state initiatives and win them. Because so far we haven't had a lot of opposition at the local level, but as this starts to gain traction, we will see more of that. And certainly if we went to the state level, we would see that. And we don't want to jump the gun and run state initiatives before we're prepared to win them. And part of being prepared to win them is an educated populace that is clear on what it thinks and is involved with our campaign. So the local resolutions through the initiative process are what will get that done. So if you go via the governing body, like I said, the advantage is that you have to talk to fewer people. And the disadvantage, though, is that your language may be changed, and our experience is that actually you have to have a whole fight with that elected body, whoever they may be, probably your city council, to ensure that your language isn't watered down and that the initiative that's placed before the voters is what you really want it to be. And we've had 3 campaigns in 2011, and for various reasons, actually all 3 of those went through a governing body, not signatures. And only one of those did we not have a problem with the language being a real fight. So our lesson learned is definitely collecting signatures and bypassing that governing body has huge advantages. Including that you have to talk to more people, because that gives you the opportunity and us all the opportunity to educate the public, recruit new members, and grow this movement. And there's just no way we're going to get this done unless we exponentially by tens of thousands grow. And we can't do that unless we talk to people. So even though it will take more time, the payoff is huge for being able to by collecting signatures. And you also control the resolution language, and you build your capacity as an organization, which makes our movement more powerful. And the disadvantages, like I've been saying, are that the citizens initiative process, the signature process, is not possible in all areas. From our perspective, essential elements of any resolution are included in the model that I posted for you, and that's on the website. We really encourage folks to not spend a ton of time tweaking the language of the resolution and arguing over angels dancing on the head of a pin. It should be straightforward, which the model is, and call for amending the U.S. Constitution, make it clear that corporations do not have constitutional rights, and establish that money is not speech. If you do need to change it, it's not that we will tell you, okay, no, this is no longer moved to amend, but part of why we did the work to create a model is so that you wouldn't have to spend a ton of time reinventing that wheel. So we're happy to work with you, though, if you have some questions about the language or reasons why you might want to tweak it. So I'm just going to go through an example of which was our first campaign in Madison, Wisconsin, in April 2011. They initially chose to do the signature route, and they also chose to go for the spring election. So obviously what we're talking about in most places for 2012 is the November presidential election, but it greatly varies by state and municipality how much time you have to collect the signatures. So there are definitely places where you have time to get something on the spring ballot if you like, And in West Allis, which is a suburb of Milwaukee, our Move to Amend group there does have an initiative on the ballot for the spring election. But we're thinking that most of the initiatives will be on the November ballot. And then in Madison, they collected a little bit more than 15,000 signatures, valid signatures. So that means that it was actually a registered voter and that their signature matched and that they put all the right information in 60 days. And ultimately, the campaign, once it was on the ballot, it passed by 84% in Madison. So a couple things about that effort. What folks on the ground said that the signature campaign was like was that it was intense. Obviously, they collected a ton of signatures in just 2 months, but it was also very positive. There was a huge outpouring of support. Many people have said that they've never been thanked so often for any campaign. I mean, obviously they were volunteers and they had tons of people so appreciative that they were doing the work to bring this issue forward. And it infused their organization. They were one of our first affiliates with hundreds of very active and very enthusiastic volunteers. And it definitely brought the group closer together. It helped gel the group. And they came out of the campaign as one of our strongest affiliates. So they talked to tens of thousands of people, obviously. Their anecdotal data showed that basically half of them knew nothing about corporate personhood or Citizens United or Money as Speech, so basically knew nothing about what we were talking about. So that's thousands of people who then did hear about the issue. The signature campaign itself was very successful at educating people. If they had gone straight into an election, if, say, their city council had just put it on the ballot without them collecting signatures, they would have bypassed a huge opportunity to talk to people one-on-one and bring this issue to them in a way that was unfiltered through media and sound bites and was neighbor to neighbor. And they ended up with a volunteer list of about 1,000 people coming out of that campaign. Unfortunately, though, because of the timing and some other internal factors, they didn't quite reach their goal for the valid number of signatures. If they had needed to, they would have easily been able to reach that goal for the fall election. But what they decided to do is go to their city council and basically presented their 15,000 signatures and said, we are asking you to put this on the ballot for us. We clearly have the capacity to do this if we need to, and we will if you won't. But we want this on the spring election ballot, so please put it on for us. I'll stay here for a second. They had a big fight, like I said, on their hands a bit with the city council, and it took a lot of wrestling to ensure that ultimately what was on the ballot was what they wanted. And that was even after they had 15,000 signatures. So that's why we say that if you can bypass the city council and go directly to the voters, you're much more likely to get what you really want out of it and not feel like you're spinning your wheels in a fight with potentially a very small number of people who might even be progressives and agree with you. This was the case in Madison, also in Boulder, where they didn't have enough time. They kind of missed the signature gathering deadline, but they really wanted to have something on the ballot last November. And so they went to their city council and ended up having a huge campaign just to get the city council to approve putting it on the ballot, even though the majority of that council were, so-called progressives, Democrats, leftists, however you want to describe that, but still, they wanted to water down the language and only address Citizens United. They wanted to understand all of the nuances of corporate personhood, and, really, we don't need to convince, say 5 people on some city council board that this is what needs to happen. We need to convince thousands of voters who are actually more with us than those kind of elite Politico folks. And, I have many friends who are elected officials. I actually am one myself, but at the same time, there's a certain elitism sometimes that comes with being an elected official that makes many think that they know better than regular voters. And so you have to kind of somehow get through that when you when you take this to them. And if you can bypass them, then you don't have to worry about any of that. So, but having said all that, both in Madison and in Boulder, they were able to get it on the ballot using their city councils. And so if you don't have the citizens initiative process, you definitely can still do an initiative by going to your city council if that's an option in your community. And if you do need to do that, our recommendation is that you still collect a lot of signatures that say, rather than saying, this will be on the ballot and it's done through the kind of official petitioning process, your petition would say, we, the voters of XYZ town, ask our city council to place this initiative on the ballot. And then you'd have your resolution language as you want it. And then that's what people would be signing. And so it's not a binding petition the way that it is in a place that has that process, but it is a political tool and organizing tool that you can use to then present to your council to say, if we had the initiative process here, the citizens initiative process, we would have clearly been able to collect the signatures, or, just that your constituency have clearly asked you to do this, and so we're here to deliver that message to you. Will you please put this on the ballot as written? And so, and then the other benefit of collecting the signatures is you get some of that benefit that comes with being able to talk to people one-on-one, building your volunteer base, and actually collecting signatures, even though it can sound intimidating, it's a lot easier than you think to get people to sign this issue. It's one of the easiest. Many of the folks who have worked on these campaigns, who have worked on others, agree that this is one of the easiest things to get people to sign. 85% of the American public agree with us. And so building that list of people who are enthusiastic about getting this on the ballot gives you a great base of people to reach out to get involved in the campaign. So if you go straight to your city council, if say, you're friends with your city council, or maybe some of you here are even, elected officials yourselves, I'd still encourage you to not bypass the organizing, because ultimately the organizing is what's going to get this amendment passed, not just who we know in high places. So for signature gathering, some things to consider are, how much time you have, and that greatly varies. So unfortunately, I can't, go through that and tell you have this many days, because it totally depends on what state you're in. And so that's some of the research that you need to do to kind of figure out, well, how much time do we have? And then once you know that, things to consider are, what time of year. We're in winter right now, so do you have time to start a little bit later in the spring when people are more likely to be out and about and willing to be stopped on the street or at the grocery store, in front of the grocery store, to talk to you? Are there events? A really good way to rack up a lot of signatures is at like street fairs and festivals and things like that. A lot of that stuff happens in the summertime. So, another good place is actually during the holiday shopping time. Even though people are busy, people are going to the store. So we're not in that period right now. So that's a question. But, many people live in climates where that's less of a factor. So those are all things for you to weigh. And then in Madison, for example, and in a number of places, one thing to consider is, when are there students around if you're in a college community? Because lots of times they will be a good base of folks, not just for signatures, but also to be volunteers and to work on your campaign. And if you do it at a time when they're not around, they're not in session. So like the summer, even though that might be good for doing events, if students aren't here, then you lose that base of folks. And so those are all questions, strategic questions to weigh. There may be others. And then the petition format, to some extent, is going to be dictated again by your the official rules in your state. In California, for example, where I live, it's very prescriptive of how big the font is and what you can have where and all of this. But to the extent that there is latitude, some things that you might want to include is like how people can volunteer, and then directions. In Madison, if an enthusiastic person signed the petition and said, wow, this is great, then the volunteer who was collecting those petitions would actually say, well, here are 5 petition sheets. The directions for how to do this are right on the back. And, can I give these to you, and will you pass collect signatures for us and then get them back to us. So those kinds of things are good to consider. And if you can't put all that stuff on your petition, then, you know, having a sheet with you that where you can give it to people. And then also, if you're not doing the legally binding petitions because you don't have the citizens initiative process, then of course you have even more latitude on, you know, what's on that sheet. So you can't see this very well, but this is an example of the Madison petition. So on the left is sort of the official petition, and then on the right is where they had the directions, the things that people needed to know if they were collecting signatures, where to turn them in, and the deadlines, and also who to contact if they needed more information. And then they also had a flyer, just kind of a general info sheet that they gave to everybody. And then in Madison, the details were a little bit different. So they had information about, you know, how if you don't live in Madison, what you need to know. So we have these examples and can work with you to make sure that you're following the rules you need to, and at the same time have all the little organizing tips included. Like I said, a great place to collect signatures, and again, this is binding or non-binding, it doesn't matter. A great place to collect signatures is just where people are, right? So neighborhood festivals, rallies, concerts, a great we did a ballot initiative here in Humboldt County in 2006 that I was the campaign manager for, and we found a great way to collect signatures was actually catching people while they're in lines, because they have nowhere to go and they're not going to be impatient with you for asking them to take a moment. So as they're going into movies or concerts or things like that, we would just, you know, make sure that there was a volunteer there collecting signatures and just going down the line and asking everybody. Farmers markets, the post office, near grocery stores. Grocery stores oftentimes will tell you that you cannot petition there, and the way that the courts have ruled is that if a grocery store or any store consistently does not allow any petitioners, then that can be upheld. But if they allow any kind of petitioners, including like Salvation Army bell dingers, because that counts as solicitation. If there's any kind of solicitation that happens, then because of the First Amendment, they have to allow all solicitation. So any place where there's been a Salvation Army bell dinger over the holidays is fair game for you to go, and they might push back on you, but you know, we can help you have what you need to know to let them know that they can't. And like I said, post offices, any place where people are gathered. Also, ally organizations can be asked to collect signatures for you of their membership at their meetings, at their events. Petition signers and independent volunteers, like I said, so if somebody is very enthusiastic, you can pass on petition sheets to them and ask them to get them back to you kind of on their own. And then door to door. In Madison, they didn't do this that much. Here in Humboldt County, for our initiative, we definitely did do some door to door when we entered into that time where there were not as many street events and festivals and things, and in between the holidays, we did door to door, and it was a nice way to, even though you don't get as many signatures per hour, you're laying groundwork. So for every door where there's no one home, we left a flyer, and then that was still a person who heard about our campaign. Even if they didn't get to sign it, they were prepped for when the election happened. So then going on to the election campaign. So once you collect your signatures, and again, I'm sorry that I can't say, you know, you have this many days and you would turn them in by this date. That's all going to vary state by state, and we can work with you to help figure out the answers to those questions or where you need to go to get them. But once you collect your signatures, for a citizens initiative, the process is that you turn them in to the elections department, and then there's some verification process that they undergo to determine whether you qualified for the ballot, and then they'll alert you that you're qualified for the ballot, and then you begin your election campaign. And if you're in a place that doesn't have the citizens initiative process, then basically after you get the city council to vote to approve to put it on the ballot, your resolution on the ballot, then you would begin your political campaign. And I'm not going to talk a ton about it, but you know, obviously when you're lobbying your city council, collecting petitions, like I said, but then also, turning people out to the meetings, making sure that there are people there to give public comment, and all the similar sort of stuff that you would do to, influence them are all things that you would engage in to get that win of getting them to put it on the ballot. So once it's approved to go on the ballot, however that happens, you want to focus on coalition building and outreach. Getting endorsements from other organizations, from prominent people in the community, from elected officials. In November 2012, obviously there will be a lot of campaigning and politicking going on. So if there are people running for office in your local community, you can make this an issue and get people to take a position on your initiative. And if you can show that you have, capacity to be making a difference in not just your own election, your initiative election, but also others, just because of your numbers, that'll help entice candidates running for office, to want to be taking a position in support of your initiative. That was kind of what we did here in Humboldt, is we made sure to lock up a lot of elected officials. And all of these things, I should say, it's good to start on them actually before you qualify for the ballot. This is sort of when you begin these things in earnest and in a public way. But getting endorsements early, actually kind of before you have any opposition, while you're collecting signatures, can be really strategic to help make sure that you come out of the gate in a really strong position. Same thing with getting other organizations to endorse and sign on. Doing fundraising, doing events, and then media and publicity are all aspects of the election campaign. So, and this is still kind of mostly using Madison as the case study. So for media, they got earned media, and we have some webinars and other materials that we've created. If you want help on how to do that stuff, if you're not familiar with how to do that, how to get stories in print media. Also placing your own op-eds, letters to the editor, writing editorials is a really great way to get media. The opinion page is the most read page of a newspaper, and so that's a great place for you to have your information. Doing public service announcements on radio, and also calling into radio shows or getting interview opportunities on both radio and television. Using social media, oftentimes it seems like in more rural communities, Facebook is more frequently used than Twitter, but being on all fronts is a good idea. In Madison, they mostly focused on Facebook. And then some paid advertising is a good idea as well. And then flyers are obviously something you can put directly in people's hands. Since we will have an election in November 2012, any political campaign or political party that you can get to endorse your effort might help you out by when their volunteers are doing lit drops. They could also be doing literature drops at people's doors for your campaign, and you could also choose to do that vice versa if you were a volunteer on multiple campaigns. We did that for our initiative here in Humboldt County too. Building your email list, so those petition signers that you collected, asking them if they'd like to be added to your email list so you have a good list going into the election. The petition signers who have signed the National Move to Amend petition would be available to you as well. The email list of coalition partners, whether they're the Move to Amend coalition partners at the national level who might have local folks, or coalition partners that you build locally. And then building a website that can be relatively basic, and also our affiliates have websites on the Move to Amend site, so you could use that. Doing rallies, and then get out the vote stuff, and election day visibility. And all of these things are talked about in more detail in a webinar that we did last year. I think it was probably our May webinar, where one of the organizers from Madison really walked through their campaign and talked about exactly what they did and gave more examples. So if you want more information about any of these things, I encourage you to watch that recording. So I'm almost done here. Some of the lessons that we learned from the 2011 initiative campaigns are, like I said, reaching out before the signature campaign starts, and then even before the election too, to get people involved. So getting maybe some of those resolutions passed through organizations to build your base of support before you even launch your signature campaign helps with resources like volunteers and outreach, etc. Finding coalition partners from across the political spectrum. In Madison this passed by 84%. In Boulder it was almost 75. Missoula 75, and polling shows more than 85% of folks agree with us. So that says that in every election this has happened. Conservative folks have voted for this. Not all of them, obviously, but many of them. And so there is ample opportunity to reach out across the political spectrum. I already mentioned asking organizations to pass resolutions, and then also just noting that even organizations that can't officially endorse for various reasons might still be willing to be listed as supporters, so making it easy for folks to give you some level of support, or they might be able to give you a quote talking about why passing an amendment like this would be important. Like I was talking about with governing bodies, you don't have any control over them, so be very careful about going that route. They could totally change your resolution and put a lot of roadblocks in your way. Also in Madison, their Dane County, where Madison is, actually kind of jumped on board and took their resolution, tried to change it a lot, and then put it on the ballot at the same time. So they had a real twist in the road that they weren't expecting. And so just kind of keeping an eye and maybe giving tabs to other legislative bodies nearby. Just meeting with friends that you might have on those councils to let them know what you're doing, and that you're in Madison. They wanted to go to the county after doing the city, and so but the county jumping in sort of threw a wrench in that plan. So, but if they had given a heads up to some of their allies on the board of supervisors, they might have been able to avoid that. So just remembering that others are paying attention to you, and as this issue is becoming more and more popular and prominent, don't assume that you're the only ones thinking about this. A pile of constituent signatures is persuasive, like I said, so that can make a big difference to a governing body. So don't bypass getting signatures, even if you can't do it in an officially binding way. And identifying a lead sponsor who is a strategic person on the board, and who's not, on one side too far or the other, but at the same time is going to really be a champion for what you're doing. That was really critical in Boulder. They had a great champion in Macon Cowles on their city council board, and he helped make the difference for making sure that the resolution wasn't watered down. Important to be organized, so forming a publicity committee and putting real energy into media. We have stuff to help you with talking points and an FAQ, developing relationships with reporters if you don't already have them, using that free earned media through op-eds and letters to the editor, and thinking of creative and fun ways to get people's attention. We did a whole webinar on that topic, so I think it was our June one, so encourage you to take a look at that for some neat ideas. And obviously you might have your own too. And then keeping things really simple, appealing to people's common sense. We have the benefit of the majority of the American people being with us right now, and so not overthinking this. Yes, it is a complex issue in some ways, but on the other hand, the idea that a corporation is not a person and should not have the same rights as human beings is actually pretty straightforward. Same with money as speech. So not making it overly complicated, because that's not where most voters are going to take it. So you don't need to worry that you need to have every single answer either. Appealing to democracy, fairness, fundamental human values, using nonpartisan language, and then not just talking about facts and figures, telling a story. We also have a webinar on some of that. And then it's important to lay out a plan. So I always think that it works best when you're running a campaign to work backwards. There's election day, November 2012, so then work back and set your goals by, month to month or week to week, and identify what roles you're going to need to get it done, and then make sure that you recruit other people to fill those roles so that you don't burn out. And again, there's more details about each one of these things in the webinar that we did in May about all of this. So that took a little bit longer than I thought it was going to. So I definitely want to make sure there's some time for Q&A. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to take that off of my screen. So if you have questions, go ahead and type them in, and I will do my best to get through as many as possible. And I'll mostly go look for the ones that I know I didn't get to in the presentation. So first off, I should say, we should just put this at the beginning. The presentation will be available. There'll be a recording of this posted on our website. And for all the folks who are participants, we can provide you slides, a PDF of the slides. And I also will send a few other materials like the model resolution to you along with the that for everybody who registered for this call. So let's see what else here. How do we increase the profile of these issues such that voters will demand that each candidate for political office declare which side of the move to amend fence they stand on? That's from Mike in Washington, D.C. Well, that's a really good question. I think part of how we will do that is by these initiative campaigns can help with that, because if this is on the ballot as people are running for office, obviously it's much more likely that they're going to take a position. And then that's sort of an organizing question that's up to us, right? I did a webinar on bird dogging candidates and how to make move to amend, how to use elections as a platform for the Move to Amend campaign a couple months ago. So I'd encourage you to look at that. We talked about how to bird dog candidates, basically showing up at political debates. The Romney quote about a corporation is a person, my friend, that actually happened because folks showed up there and intentionally were going to, bring that up to him. And then it became kind of phenomenon in the election for a month or so. So we can do that. We can also make sure that for, local elections, for city council elections, lots of times debates will happen, you can call in on the radio or you can submit questions. And so submitting questions and just making this so that it's everywhere. That's definitely part of what we're going to need to do to make sure that this issue is on the tip of everyone's tongue. So let's see, I'm trying to work through, not everybody has questions. Some folks are making statements. How can we get a statement for or against the amendment from our representatives, then using that in the media to expose those who do or do not support our cause? From this, the electorate would know who to support. And that was Rick in Houston. Kind of like the last comment, definitely agree. Move to Amend at this point is a project of a 501c3. So one of the other previous webinars that we did talked about how right this minute we're not engaged in that. However, certainly Move to Amend volunteers as individuals can do that, and then can ask for a pledge if you wanted to, and then post that individually as a Move to Amend affiliate. Excuse me. There are electoral law reasons why we can't do that exactly, but we're working on putting together an organization that that would be able to basically do that so that people can clearly see. Why is the Move to Amend city resolution so short while those that have passed are so much longer? Well, actually, we have two resolutions. What I showed you was the ballot initiative version. We also have a resolution for city councils to pass that is a lot longer, that has a lot of more whereases and kind of the rationale behind why we would want this resolution and statements. The reason why the one I showed you is shorter is because to go on the ballot, you have a limited amount of room, and any the argument that you're costing the city money becomes more relevant too if you have a really long ballot initiative. You want something that's short and easy for people to quickly read and that isn't going to take up a lot of space on the ballot. So that's why we prepared two versions. And if you do have to go the route, if you don't have an initiative process of any kind and your only option is to get your city council to pass a resolution, then then you could use one of the longer ones, and you might want to do that. On the other hand, though, in some ways, I think that it's even easier for City Council to understand, for all the reasons why it's easier for a voter to understand a short resolution. The same is true for a City Council. So in some ways, less is more with this, and we're just trying to get the point across. And if you want to attach the move to amend amendment language onto a resolution, which is what happened in Los Angeles, that can also help to help clarify what it is that you're talking about if people feel like a shorter resolution doesn't say enough. Jim says the state of Washington already has a resolution. Should we just support this or continue at the local level? My understanding is that at this point, the resolutions that have been introduced at the state levels, including Washington, with the exception of the one that Move to Amend is working with Public Citizen on in Vermont, mostly the resolve is about overturning Citizens United. And even though there are whereases that talk about the corporations being persons, they don't actually explicitly say that that's what the amendment should say. So for that reason, and then also what I talked about at the beginning of really the organizing strategy being the purpose of this, I mean, we don't just want a long list of communities that have passed these resolutions, because what's so much more powerful than that is a long list of communities that are active and engaged and volunteering on this campaign. So the only way to do that is to actually go to voters. And so a state resolution at this point, it just isn't going to get you that organizing capacity. And a number of resolutions were introduced at the state level in 2011, and most of those weren't able to really get any traction, hardly at all. Many of them didn't even get out of committee. And the reason why is because the people who are often in state office are just as much beholden to large corporations as our Congress members are. So that's going to be a whole push to get our state legislatures as well. And so all of that kind of begins back with the voters. So from our perspective, we can't bypass the American people. That's who we really need to be talking to. Let's see. Will these slides be available in PDF form? As I said, yes. Election boards are not always as helpful as they should be. Right. Like I said, the Ursula in Syracuse, that's part of why I would encourage you to not only go there, and in fact, in some ways, not go to your election board until you have a little bit better sense of exactly what it is you're asking of them. Because, for example, in Humboldt County, we had very well-meaning election officials, which isn't even always necessarily the case, but we just learned that any question that we asked, we had to assume that we should maybe ask it again later from somebody else and see if we actually would get the same answer, or do the research of the code ourselves, ask them the question, get the answer back, and then say, what part of the code for the state are you looking at to get that? And if they told you, look it up ourselves and make sure that our interpretation was close to theirs, because it's just, there aren't that many citizens initiatives, and in general, elections officials aren't that crazy about them. One of the arguments from those who support that corporations are people is that trade unions, environmental orgs, etc., can contribute to candidates, so why not corporations? I suggest that none other than persons should have the right to donate to candidates, and I am a member of the NRA, environment organizations, etc. And that is from Rick in Houston. So Rick, it's possible that maybe you chimed in after I said that the Move to Amend amendment deals with all artificial entities, which is anybody that is not a person. And from our perspective, it's the only way to do this and be intellectually honest is to say that only human beings have constitutional rights, one, and then also two, from a strategic perspective, as you're kind of raising, there's just no way that conservatives will get on board with an amendment that basically allows for some kinds of entities to have rights under the Constitution and not others. So for both of those reasons, our perspective is that, we need to be really clear that only people have rights under the Constitution, and that's what the Constitution is for. And that's why we're not supporting the amendments that have been introduced that have basically like loopholes for nonprofits and unions. Jim is adding that the resolution in Washington is stuck in Judiciary Committee. Right, that's exactly where it is in most states, even in Vermont, where we are actively working, because we see that as maybe one of the first places that might be able to pass a state resolution. And that's coupled with a very intensive organizing strategy at the town hall level, or at the town meeting level in Vermont. Even so, a resolution was introduced last year by a legislator working with Move to Amend, and she wasn't able to get the resolution out of committee in Vermont. And we're, even with all of the momentum that has happened in the last year, we're running into almost as much of a roadblock at the state level there. So, I'm sorry to be the bearer of this news, but we just really can't bypass the public, because our elected officials are, kind of bought and paid for at all levels. And so it doesn't really make sense for us to make this appeal to them until we have the political power behind us to make it so that they don't really have a choice but to get on board. Gary from Lexington says, you seem to be using the terms initiative and referendum interchangeably. Are they one and the same? That actually depends on the state, but for the purposes of everything that I said, kind of yes. So folks know and might be familiar with, for example, in California, what an initiative is a citizens initiative with the signatures, and a referendum is when a city council puts it on the ballot. Generally, it's even like if they pass something and then they put it on the ballot for the voters to affirm. But every state's different, so initiative and referendum oftentimes are used interchangeably, and I'm sorry if that's not the case in your state and if that's confusing. So let's see what else. Where to get examples of the initiative of what to put on the ballot from Calvin in Idaho. The language is in this presentation, and then if you go to the Move to Amend website and go to the organizing resources section, or if you scroll down on the bottom of the first page, one of the first three things in organizing resources says model resolution for ballot initiatives, and that is where you can find what we're suggesting that you put on the ballot. And I will also send a copy of that resolution text to everybody who registered for this webinar. Bob in New Hope, Pennsylvania, are you connecting with other groups with the same goal? One of our problems is lack of coordination among all the grassroots groups popping up around this and other grassroots movements along this line. Yeah, Bob, I agree that that is a concern. We are working with other groups that are working on this. Move to Amend is a coalition, and so by definition, there are a number of groups who are part of Move to Amend who could be working on their own but are not. They're working together through the Move to Amend coalition. On top of that, though, there are some other national organizations that are not part of the Move to Amend coalition that have gotten involved in this fight since Citizens United. And so with most of those, we are working together in what we're calling a constellation, which is under the umbrella of United for the People. And where we work together in ways, we're not all on the same page about what the amendment should say. And what we've kind of reconciled is that this movement needs to be broad and come from multiple directions, and it's still early in this fight, and so it kind of makes sense that not everyone is of the same mind. This is still a debate, really, about exactly what it should say, and should unions be exempted, should it address money as speech or not, should it talk about all corporate constitutional rights or just the First Amendment. So all of those things are still in debate. We're clear on where we stand on all of that. And at United for the People, we're working together on the anniversary of Citizens United and trying to make that those actions amplified by all of us working together instead of separately. And over the next year, we're going to try and find other ways to do that. but also at the same time, since we're not all in agreement about what the amendment should say, it doesn't make sense for us to work together in all ways. But from our perspective, any group that is committed to grassroots democracy and anti-oppression, and that money is not speech, and that corporations should not have constitutional rights, is welcome to be part of the Move to Amend coalition, and we have organizations coming on with our coalition all the time. So we definitely are interested in working together as much as possible. Douglas in Ventura, California. I think I have the option of asking both city and county. Is there advantage to either or both? So you're in California, so definitely we have the citizens initiative process. So actually you could do that route, and you could definitely do that through both the city and the county, or either or both. It looks like for 2012, what most of our affiliates in California are going to be working on are county resolutions. I know that in Mendocino and in Sonoma, where we have active affiliates, and also here in Humboldt County, we talked about whether to do city, all the cities in a county, or just to do the county. And ultimately what folks decided is that it would be confusing if it was on multiple city ballots, and the county is kind of a good umbrella to get everybody. And since we have that option here in California, that makes a lot of sense. It also makes it so that our volunteers, because California does have a law that you have to be in the jurisdiction, you have to be a registered voter in the jurisdiction where you collect signatures for. So if you do a county ballot initiative, that increases your pool of volunteers. Whereas if you're doing city by city, then folks who don't live in the incorporated areas cannot be official signature gatherers, and also you can't overlap as much. So that's why folks chose the county. It's not, we sort of leave it up to you. You know your community best, but those reasons were all persuasive to us in Humboldt County as well, and so we're going to be going to our county level for our ballot initiative. Let's see. I'm actually I'm focusing on the questions that have to do with the initiative process here. I see that there are others, and so I'm going to prioritize the ones that are on this topic, so just so folks know. Let's see if there are any other questions. Many campuses have strict limitations on the activity on campus. That's true, and it's good to find out the rules for things. Oftentimes you can register voters on campuses, and so you can, it's good to ask, and it's also always best to have students be the ones doing the outreach on campuses over folks who are not students. Marcia from Cincinnati says that they were prohibited in Ohio from post offices. If you're on the sidewalk, that's public property, and you're definitely allowed to collect signatures on the sidewalk, kind of as people are going in. There's a couple other questions here about the post office. So it sounds like there are some issues potentially, and it's a good idea to find out ahead of time, similar to the stores, kind of what the rules are, but then also to keep in mind that probably most of the time you're going to be told a more restrictive answer about collecting signatures than maybe is the truth. So we can help you kind of figure out the answer to that, and also good to ask others who have done signature campaigns kind of what they did. Let's see what else we've got here. All right, so looks like the last few questions are where can we access the old webinars? If you go to movetoamend.org/webinars, you can see all the recordings from all the old webinars, and I do see that there is at least one person who has felt like this presentation was a little bit higher level than you were expecting. And I definitely tailored it for folks who probably have some political experience. And so apologies if that hasn't been you. I would really encourage folks to check out some of the earlier webinars, the orientation webinars, on the background on corporate personhood, which was the second one we did, and just the orientation one for some of that initial background. These webinars, our primary audience are the Move to Amend affiliates, and then we open them up to everyone else as well. And so, and we base the topics on what people have asked for and people have said they need. So there are a lot of folks who are on this call who are like ready to start working on initiative campaigns, and this is kind of what they needed. But if that's not quite you yet, there are a lot of other topics that I encourage you to check out. And then also there's time, if you have any questions that I didn't answer, I'll post how you can get a hold of us and follow up. So, all right, it looks like there's still a few folks who have some questions. I just want to run through them really fast, even though, well, we will definitely end by 5:30, like I said. So in New York City, the issue will already be on the ballot here. No, Michael from Brooklyn. Actually, New York City passed a resolution through their city council, inspired by the city council in Los Angeles. And so I would encourage folks in New York to do what we're encouraging our LA group to do, which is to think about, now that the city council has passed a resolution, still trying to get it on the ballot for the voters, because even though it's very exciting that these big cities have passed these resolutions, most folks don't know about them in those cities even. So you could even go back to the city council and the request could be, can you put this on the ballot now? And so if you're interested in working with us to do that, we'd be very enthusiastic to see New York do that. So, and just to remind everybody that a PDF of the slide will be available, and I will also send you a link to the model resolution so that folks have all of that. And then there is, I'm sorry I didn't get to every single question, there's a survey at the end of this webinar where you will be automatically directed when we close out. So ask you to stay on your computer for a second and fill that out. If you have any questions that we didn't get to, if you post them there, I will follow up, or somebody else here will follow up and make sure that we get back to you with the answers. And also, if you're not already plugged into a local Occupy the Courts action on January 20th, encourage you to go to movetoamend.org/occupythecourts to find an action near you, or even start one up. There's still time. We don't have the topic for our next webinar, but if you go to movetoamend.org/webinars, it will be posted there along with the recording from this, and it will be on Tuesday, February 7th. Normally this is on the first Tuesday of the month, but because of the holiday, we postponed it for 1 week. But if you're welcome to join us, we'd love to have you on the 7th, and we have a couple options for the topic, so we'll figure that out soon. If you want to engage with us more, you can always email us at info@movetoamend.org or give us a call. That's Democracy Unlimited's number. Like I said, we're the field organizing support team for Move to Amend. That's our role in the coalition. So we really look forward to working with all of you. I know there are a number of new folks who are not part of Move to Amend affiliates yet who are on this call, and so I hope that you will consider becoming a Move to Amend affiliate. If you go to movetoamend.org/affiliate, there's information about how to do that, and the application is relatively simple, and we're the only group that lets local folks come on board, and it's because our principles of grassroots organizing are really at the forefront of how we're running the coalition, and so we want to work with all of you. So I apologize that we didn't get through all the questions. I'm very excited that people were so engaged in this topic. And when I end the meeting, feel free to post your questions as part of the survey, and I'd love to get your feedback on how you felt about this and also any ideas for future topics that you have. So thanks very much, everyone, for being here, and I'll wish you a good night, and I look forward to the follow-up discussions that I'm sure that we're going to have. Take care, everybody.